And we're live. I guess you can go live without breaking the video. I couldn't figure out a way to break that intro video. Whatever.
This is just beginners issues.
I suppose. All right, so Mr. John Slaughter, how are we doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm starting to feel a little bit of the burnout of running around trying to promote my book. So my brain is I'm starting to feel a little bit of that burnout in my brain, but I'm doing good other than that.
Well, speaking of, how's that been going?
It's going good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't complain. I mean, I hit 152 copies today, not counting whatever I sold that I had, personally.
Okay.
So, not bad. From what I understand, that's pretty good. I've talked to some other writers about their sales, and so I'm satisfied with it, I should say.
Yes. Now, push back on anything that's messing with your OPSEC setup or anything else. But have you been doing local tours? Are you building on the IRL side as well?
No, man. It's funny you say that. There's actually like a really good local bookstore near me. It's not in the town I live in, but it's like 30 minutes away. It's like one of the only real bookstores you can find that's not like a Barnes and Noble or like a college, bookstore. And I keep meaning to go up there and give them some of my. I thought about taking some copies and see them, but I just haven't. I haven't done that yet. So everything's been in the digital space so far.
Yeah, you're a blessed man. Those sort of stores are harder and harder to find because, like, you name the two big ones. You got Barnes and Nobles, and then you got the college bookstores, which, boy, make of that what you will. But then the other one I find anymore is it's in between a thrifty hippie boutique shop, and it's got books in it. But when I say books, we're talking multiple variations of the feminine mystique or girls with power. Yeah. It's just this weird vibe.
Oh yeah, no, we've got a couple of those. Like you said, they pop up next to the boutiques. They're like they're like a hop, skip, and a jump. They're in the same category. I'm sure the same type of girls own them and frequent them. But all we have, we got Barnes and Noble, and then up the ways there's a not Borders, Books A Million, which I thought was gone. But this little bookstore is they actually, one of the cool things they do is they buy books from like estate sales and stuff, but also the college, whenever they clean their library out, they give them their books. So I've gotten like hardback copies of like Heidegger and stuff for like $3 because they have the library print in them, the stamp. So it's a pretty good deal.
Oh, I love that. My dad used to have one of those stamps. Not the ink stamp, but like the daggum press. I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, I gotta get me one of those because I'm always lending books out or whatever, and it's like, duck on it. Most of them come back, but some of them don't.
Just brander books, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't loan out my hardbacks. That's why I don't do that.
Well, and that's where I got in trouble because as a young man, all I'm gonna buy is hardbacks, which eventually I had to cave on that, but. Yeah, I don't know. Books are fun. You got some good ones. So did I see, how do you pronounce his name? But Camp of the Saints, did I see that?
Oh, Raspbill. Yeah, I got that.
How did you pull that off?
There's a very big account we all follow that I'm pretty close friends with, and he scored it and already had a copy. So I got it for like $50.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. I got it for dirt cheap. I have that, and I have a first edition Catcher of the Rye that I found at a thrift store.
Okay, so for sheer collector's sense, that's unbelievable. Now,
I don't even like the book. That's why
I was about to ask you. I was okay. That's where I was ultimately going. I hated that book.
No, I was in the store. Me and my son went up there. We have this huge, like, those antique thrift malls where people have booths that they can rent out. And we like to go through there and just look at stuff. And I walked in this booth and this lady had it for $35. So I Google it while I'm in there, and it says it's worth $60,000. So I'm like freaking out, and I I get back, I buy it for $35, get back to the house, and then a friend of mine who collects books, that's what he does. He does rare book sales. I sent him pictures of it. He's like, yeah, it's only worth about like 4,000 because it's a first edition, third printing, I think, or something like that. So,
Right. Okay.
but
Yes.
still, a big good return on investment for $35.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah. It's so D and some other folks have gotten into it before. Just the whole idea of book binding and that process and the leathers and the stitching. Oh, it's beautiful. You know, I've got books that I've been given that I won't ever even look up because and maybe they're worth nothing, but just the stitching and the hardware and the build of the book means so much to me. I'm like, I can't get rid of this.
Oh yeah, well, and a lot of people don't realize, man, books are extremely good store of value. If you can find, good, you have to find them, but once you do, they hold their value for pretty much ever.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, I first got introduced to that, and that my grandfather died, and he just had. We didn't really know the guy. Him and my dad they did not have a great relationship, and so he passes, and we find out he has rooms with stacks of comic books, and it's like old Donald Duck and Richie Rich and what a bunch of old Conans. That was fun getting
Were
introduced
they
to
were
that.
they worth anything?
Well, so here's the problem. Mom and dad, first off, they just gave them to us and were like, "Have at it, guys." So we went nuts, and I was 10 at the time, and so we went nuts going through all these thousands of comic books, and then on top of that, we had them in the basement. And within a year of getting them, that's when we learned like, oh, there's such a thing as a sump pump. Yeah, so more than half of them probably got destroyed when the basement flooded, and then the rest of them we just they were well enjoyed. So yeah, I have no idea. If I had to guess, there were a couple in there that it
Well,
was
the
on a
problem the problem with that is though you always have to find you like even if they're worth something, somebody has to be
the
willing to pay
buyer.
it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Yep. So that's always fun. All right. Well, hey. So I am not a football fan. I am not anti-football. I am totally ignorant. What I have heard though is that this is the greatest image in football.
Oh God. We're not gonna do the SEC Big Ten thing. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna get,
I don't know.
I
I've
can't
just
help myself.
this is what I've been told. I don't know.
I always think of 2013, I think it was, when Alabama beat Notre Dame for the national title. And the best tweet I ever saw was some Notre Dame fan, and he said, "How did we lose the game this badly to a bunch of inbreds and ex-slaves?" And I just think it's hilarious. I feel
There's a
like
lot.
that's how all Big Ten fans see the SEC.
Well, it's funny. Like growing up, yeah, I am halfway serious in that. I don't know, man. The bug never bit, but then it was definitely around, and I was exposed to all of it. And it's like you never heard of anything outside of the Big Ten until you ran into them later in the season, if you did. And then it was like TCU. What's that? What's a horned toad? What's a Crimson Tide? What in the world?
Well, I mean, and that's when we can get into this in a minute, but that was part of the beauty of college football was that in its prime, the end of the season, you would meet programs that you may never play again, or you might play five times over, they may have played five times over 100 years, and so that game was for bragging rights for God knows how long.
Yeah. Now you might know better than me on this. At one point, were the were the conferences and were the schools in particular, and we'll get into pro maybe in a little bit. But was it ever like the club series over in the UK and over in Europe, where these are local guys, or at the very least state guys that are competing against other states? Was it ever that closed off?
Yeah, it really was that closed off. Probably, you probably really saw sort of like a watershed moment in the early 2000s as college football started to take off financially. But prior to that, 90% of your team, if not more, would either be from in-state or a state that bordered yours. So like the University of Alabama or Auburn's football team is going to be 90% guys from Alabama and probably Georgia. Then you're going to have some Tennessee, Florida, Mississippi. Then you may have gotten people from a little bit farther out within that SEC or the SWC. It was the Southwest Conference at one point, or there was the Southwest Conference. They were kind of separated, but it was very local. And in the 2000s, you really saw that shift, especially once the Longhorn Network came on, and then the SEC Network, and then it became, you had kids coming. Like when Alabama had Mark Ingram, he was from Michigan. He was running back, right? I believe he's from Michigan. So you had guys all of a sudden coming, from all over the country just to play at Alabama, or you saw that at USC. But for the longest time, it was very much a local thing.
Yeah, because it's interesting to think. I'm curious. Even the universities at one point thinking of themselves as a state institution or as a regional institution. How the even guys that weren't particularly invested as coaches or scouts or anything, but how they wanted the endowments to be allocated and how they wanted the school to be perceived. What sort of a pool they were picking from.
Well, you see this, to the regional thing. One of the reasons, one of the things that kind of helped keep that regional flavor was each region of the country played football a different way. So, and I saw this when I moved to California, because growing up down here in Little League and even in high school, there was you have the quarterback, but everybody ran a sort of a pro style offense, right? So you'd run on first and second down, and then you might run a play action pass on third down, but it was all, you had a big line and you lined up and you ran the ball, and then you only threw it on third down, like third and long or second and long or something, right? So then I get out to the California, and these kids are slinging the ball down the field at Pop Warner League, right?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, well, no, I was just saying. So break this down a little bit for me, for anybody. The idea being that California was being high risk, high reward, just more aggressive and constantly trying to pitch that ball.
I think it had more to do, to be honest, I think it had more to do with the physicality of the players, right? Because in the South, you have obviously a lot of black dudes, right? And so you have that speed. And so running backs and not necessarily wide receivers, but running backs and these big O lines became the thing, right? So your O line can open up a hole and you can just, send these dudes through it. And the Big Ten was a similar style because you have these big dudes from, these corn-fed guys from Nebraska or Iowa or whatever. And they had a similar style, but as you got to the West Coast, that's where you get the spread offense kind of comes from. And I don't know, I think it just had more to do with maybe the mentality of the people there. I mean, you probably really get into it. I mean, Texas was always known for great quarterbacks. It's always, been that in California, but Texas was unique in the South. But again, Texas was not part of the SEC until recently. That was always kind of tangentially the South, but it had its own flavor. But I think for different reasons, but I think mostly because just the type of athlete you had access to, you develop these different play styles. And before things became sort of universalized, your coaches were dedicated to these play styles. Nick Saban was kind of unique in his ability to change play styles, right? Like he started out his career running a pro style, and by the end, he's willing to run a spread offense or just sling the ball, every single down. So, and again, this goes back to before the change. You have coaches like Bobby Bowden or what's his name at Penn State? I can't think now, but Penn State's coach, or even Bear Bryant, who stayed at the same program for 25 years, and they played football the same way for 25 years.
So would it be fair then to say that Globo Homo comes for everything? Like there were unique regional applications of offense and defense then?
Yeah, no, 100% that was the case. And it is the global. It was the money. The money destroyed it, right? And I mean, you could go back and I tend to look at like the moment that it breaks, like I said, is it's the Longhorn Network, which really shows how much money can be made. That's what causes A&M to leave the Big 12, which causes all the conferences to fall apart. So now you have, teams in California in the Big 10. It doesn't make any sense anymore.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. But so, doggone it, I got thrown off with that Big Ten one and thinking about it, yeah, because the whole California deal. But no, there was something I was thinking. Oh, so is there now a NCAA or a college style of play, and is that markedly different from an NFL style of play?
To be honest, at the moment, I honestly don't know because I haven't watched either one in probably 4 or 5 years. I mean, when I stopped watching college, even like I said, Alabama was moving to like a spread offense. And part of this originally had to do with it's sort of like a call and response thing, right? Like one team starts to run the spread offense and you get smaller players that are faster. And when you get matched up against a team that has a big line and that, is running that pro style, you can outrun them, outpace them, and you can really cause them a bad day. So then everybody starts shifting to this. And then as everybody shifts to that style, then you would see a shift back. But that was something that happened, more into the 2000s as college football was losing its regional flavor. Um, but you always saw when I was younger, there was always a huge difference in the way college was played and the pro style was played. And a lot of that again is because of the access to the players. If you are a smaller school that can't get those athletes, you can run. If you have fast guys, you can run a spread offense. And you're not going to do that necessarily in the pros. Um, and also, the rules are just a tad bit different. And some of them, they make a big difference. Like in college, you could make a catch in bounds as long as you had 1 foot in. It was considered a catch if you had 1 foot in bounds. Pro, it had to be two. And little changes like that do make a big difference in the way you play the game.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I can remember as a kid watching different games and like you said, having 1 foot in, and I never even realized that. Oh, in the NFL, you needed 2 feet. So,
Yeah, one of the
pretty,
biggest ones that I always looked at that was to me made college so much more exciting was the overtime rules. So in college, you flip a coin in overtime and you choose to defer or take the ball first, and I think it's from the 25-yard line. You get 4 downs to score, right? And then if you score, the other team gets to respond. And if it goes into two overtimes, it's still the same thing, but now you can't kick an extra point. You have to go for the 2-point conversion. So it was like the shootout in the NHL, but for football. And so you'd have these like wildly exciting, like long, like I think LSU and Arkansas, I believe, or maybe LSU and A&M played a game that was basically 2 games in length by the time it was done. It went to like some absurd amount of overtimes, but it was super exciting, like a shootout. And then they moved to the NFL style, which was, I believe it's like sudden death. It's basically you start a new quarter and whoever scores first, the game's over, right? Which took all the excitement out of it to a degree.
yeah, I was never a fan of sudden death rules. Just there's games are always a mix of skill and chance, and to take all the skill for the past couple hours and almost dismiss it in a game of chance, I never liked it.
No, I mean, and this kind of, I guess this kind of dovetails into why I wrote about this in the first place and got kind of because everybody was, after the Super Bowl happened, everybody had their hot take about why you shouldn't watch sports ball or you should watch, sports. And I think sports are a good thing. My issue is that the when they're completely disconnected from the community and you have this sort of like this brand that is dropped in your city and you attach your identity to it, there's nothing that makes like what makes a Cowboys fan, like what is unique about being a Cowboys fan. There's nothing really there except an inorganic environment that's been created via the NFL.
It's no longer Aikman and cheerleaders.
Yeah, I mean it is, but like the example I was using is so the way that I was trying to describe it to people is like Yeah, okay, college football it's gone terrible, and there's a lot of reasons for that, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. But prior to that, up until like the early 2000s, you still had this. Every school had its own unique experience, and it was something that has been developed over 100 years in many cases. Like I had outlined that Auburn and Georgia have played everything almost every year since like 1890.
Now, a quick cut in, rudimentary. Is there any sort of free agent or any sort of trade process within college ball, or if you're going to school on a scholarship, are you locked into that school?
So that's one of the things that's killed college football, right? Is that there was always the transfer. Well, I don't know when it came online, but there was the transfer portal, and you could transfer schools because you can move from one school to the next, but you could only do that like one time, and you had certain years of eligibility. Now you can pretty much transfer as much as you want. So players will go to Auburn. Like for example, Bo Nix was the quarterback at Auburn. He transfers to Oregon because he's not getting play time. So now you're seeing players, and actually, somebody pointed this out the other day in the comments on my article where they said that Marshall had to forfeit their bowl game because all of their players set out or transferred. They couldn't even play their bowl game. So before you couldn't do that. You were basically locked in for the most part because you only have so many years of eligibility to play. So transferring could kill your career.
Well, I'm just trying to think of the pragmatics of it too. Of I'm going to keep changing schools and changing professors, which I mean, whatever. Maybe the school doesn't matter to them, but I don't want to play too much into the jock stereotype. Ugh, the whole
Yeah,
screeching
but
jock.
it wasn't like that before. Before you couldn't do that, and the
Right,
things that
right, right.
now you can, just like now players get paid, which they couldn't get paid before. Now they're
Oh,
getting
they get
paid.
paid?
Yeah, the NIL deal. I don't know the specifics of it, but they can get sponsorships and deals now. So one of the reasons that Nick Saban, as an example, he left LSU, he goes coach Miami Dolphins, and he comes back to the college. One of the reasons that college is different because you're managing players that have to listen to you. These aren't pro athletes that get paid. Like you're actually in charge. You can control the team. You're not managing egos in the same way. And basically, because of the NIL deal and transfers, you've turned college football into a mini version of the pros. And so some like Saban just quit. He's like, I'm done. He was already getting close to retirement anyways, and that was enough for him to be like, I'm done.
Yeah. So I mean, functionally, it always kind of was, but now that line between being a farm league and actually being college ball is awfully thin.
Yeah, I mean it's before, yeah, I mean there was always, guys are gonna go pro, and you would have guys consider uh sitting out a bowl game if they didn't want to get injured or something, but that didn't
Didn't
happen
McCoy
that
do that?
often. I don't know if McCoy did it. I think Brady Quinn did or talked about it.
Uh,
So many quarterbacks especially would get close to because they were like,
oh
okay, I
yeah,
don't want to get hurt. But yeah, like I was saying, what happened is you had these schools that are born in a culture like unique. Then they develop these experiences and these unique traditions that are in some cases 100 years old, and in a lot of cases, you talk to people, they can't even tell you how these traditions started because they're just so ingrained into the local community and part of the school, and that was part of the culture. And so for you to be a fan of Auburn or Alabama or Ohio State for the longest time, you had some tie to that, and there was something that it meant something, or there was a reason you had pride in it because if Ohio State beat Alabama, you could take pride in the fact that Ohio guys from Ohio or Michigan beat guys from down south, and there was a little pride in that. Whereas in the pros, there's like you're just buying players. There's no connection there.
yeah, and that's okay. To keep it real simple, yeah. If we could go back to some sort of regional connection, shoot, even better, a state connection. Just because, right? Let's have it where the guys from Kentucky hate the guys from Tennessee. Let's go back to that. Have a little bit of animosity and be competing.
Oh yeah, no, that was my issue. Is like sports are good, but they can't be sports for sports sake. There has to be something more there. And when you're cheering for the Steelers or the Cowboys or whoever, it's just for the sake of entertainment at that point. There's no connection, and it's just arbitrary, I guess. And then it really becomes, in my opinion, a surrogate activity.
Yeah, I think the first time I noticed this, and I couldn't have put it into words, but was it was Favre when he ended with Green Bay,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all done. Dude, I had buddies, they were like, "Oh man." They were from Deep Woods, Wisconsin. They said that was it. It was amazing. And then he came back and he was who did he do
Was it the
Vikings?
Vikings? Or the Vikings, I
I'm
think.
what
Yeah.
right? Like it's still the Midwest, I guess, but dude, he was the big cheese. That was
Yeah.
that was Wisconsin. And for me that was enough to be like, "Oh, that's kind of weird." So there was that one, and then I remember MLB when it was Cleveland. The Cleveland Indians went through a year where they lost like three of their big players. I think it was Kenny Lofton and Jim Thome and oh, some Latino guy if I remember right. Anyway, and I think they all went to Atlanta or something, and it was like, huh. So this is not like, oh, this is our team. These are Ohio boys. I said, no, that's not what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this simple fact that the money poisons it. Once it becomes, uh, because you could argue that like early, probably before I was born or around the time I was born, the Cowboys there was still a flavor to being the Cowboys when Tom Landry was there. But by the time I was, old enough to pay attention to football, like they're all interchangeable, right? And players didn't stay at a team for 20, for their entire career. It does to a degree now, but that's usually what, the quarterback, and that's it. Um,
Yeah,
all
the
I can
only
remember
guy.
was the only running back I know that stayed in one place,
Okay.
or maybe Barry Sanders, but still,
Oh yeah, he was Detroit for like,
yeah,
was that his whole career? Might
I
have been.
think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
he played at Oklahoma State, and then I think he went to Detroit and never left.
Well, when Brady went to Tampa Bay, that was another one. Like, dude, why didn't you just like, yeah,
Just
just call it?
retire, yeah.
Yeah.
At least he got another Super Bowl out of it, I guess.
Well, and that is one thing I'll give him, and that was actually my argument over his whole divorce and whatever. Like, it's gonna sound kind of cheesy, but when that's all you've ever known,
Hmm.
from the time you were 8 years old to the time you're 38 years old, I'm thinking it's similar to like military retirement or something. That's all you've ever done, and then you suddenly have to just turn that switch off. Yeah, you
Well,
get involved in coaching, you get involved in broadcasting, whatever, but it's not the same.
well, I think especially for guys like Brady or Jordan, who have the talent, but they're also obsessed, because that's how they become that good in the first place, right? Like there's plenty of guys in the NBA over our lifetime that have been as talented as Jordan, but who's as obsessed with the game, right? Same thing with Tom Brady. I mean, I think those guys are just obsessed and they can't let it go.
Yeah, there's to be really. See, I'm waiting for the switch to flip on YouTube where I can just say stuff without having to think about how I'm describing it. So to be really lame, about it, we'll see in there. I got lost. ADD, I guess. But shoot, what was I gonna say?
To be lame about it.
To
I don't know what
to
you're
be
gonna
yeah
say.
yeah yeah to be lame about how we talk about Jordan and Brady or whatever. It could be like, oh, that's probably not natural. That's probably kind
Oh
of
yeah.
not a great thing. And it's like whatever. Like they're being autistic about their athletics. It's awesome. Let them
Yeah.
let them conquer, so to speak.
I mean, there's only you get generational greats. I mean, and I think you have to kind of, it's a mixed bag. And if they're going to be that good, they're going to have to sacrifice. Everything is trade offs, right? And so they're trading off everything else for that game.
Yeah, and in both cases, unfortunately, I mean, seemingly from the outside looking in, they did end up trading a lot for it.
Yeah, I would bet that's a big part of the divorce is probably his unwillingness to let it go, and probably how much time he spent, studying film. And I mean, look at Saban's the same way. I mean, you imagine his wife probably just, you know, I guess he makes enough money to make up for it, but he probably lives with his face in a playbook 24/7.
Yeah, well, Brady didn't make enough money to make up for it on his side. Goodness.
Well, she already had money, so
Right.
she
Yeah.
can make her own money. But yeah,
Actually,
man,
wasn't
go
wasn't
ahead.
he the wasn't he the poor one in the?
Yeah,
Why do I
yeah.
even know this? Shame on
Because
me.
the news makes us we watch too much TV back in the day.
I guess so.
I don't know. I don't know how I know that Giselle Bundchen made like billions of dollars, but I do. Maybe my wife told me.
Yeah, I think it was. Okay, this is the last comment because this is going down dark roads. I think it was modeling. I think.
Well, she was a model. Yeah, she was a Victoria's Secret model.
Oh, okay.
But
I
I
didn't
think
know
I
that.
think she was like the last supermodel, like in that the vein of like actually when that existed, maybe.
Dude, that's a wild thread. I didn't even think about that. Like, yeah, the
Yeah,
Angels used right. Wasn't it? Weren't they the Angels or something?
yeah. There was that, but if you look it up, and it's been years since I read about it, but apparently like there's an actual like set of criteria to be a supermodel to have that
Oh,
label.
no joke.
Yeah, like you have to be on certain covers in a year. So there's some actual like
Like a
stipulation to be.
professional. Was it a professional organization or a category or?
No, it's kind of like it's like one of those unofficial things, kind of like if you win like a Grammy and an Oscar and a Tony all in one year, you get a special label. It's one of those things like people throw that term around, but the term actually, I think it was originally there was like a set of criteria that made you a supermodel, not just a really popular model.
I
If
didn't
that
know
makes
that.
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Which they don't exist anymore, just like, but that's just because, social media and, just like actor, like there's no real movie stars anymore either. So it's part of it.
Dig into that a little bit. There's
Well,
no
think
more
about
movie
it.
stars.
Yeah. So, like, think about when we were growing up, right? There were actors, and Tom Cruise is probably the last movie star, but if they were in a film, people went to see the movie just because they were in the film, right? It wasn't a franchise. It wasn't some other intellectual property that was being put on the screen. Like people were like, "Hey, that's a Mel Gibson movie. I'm gonna go see it. That's a Tom Cruise movie. I'll go see it."
Mel Gibson was who I was going to raise you. I was waiting for
Yeah.
you to finish. Yeah, yeah.
Even Denzel was like that, right? Will Smith when we were younger, but that doesn't exist anymore. Like all the big name stars are still like frozen in like 2005. It's still like Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Now, hear me out on this one a little bit. The the last one maybe that I could think that was maybe scratching at that would be like Steve Carell maybe.
Mm, I think it's close. I think comedy actors are weird. This is going off on another
Okay.
tangent.
Yeah, yeah.
Comedy actors do this thing. If you ever notice, like they hit it big, and they get like 6 or 7 movies where they just play the same thing over and over again. So you think Will Ferrell did this? Adam Sandler did that. Steve Carell, right?
Noah Daggum Smith.
Yeah. So they like Will Ferrell hit it big, whatever his first, like Talladega Nights or whatever his first like movie that was his, and then he made like 7 or 8 movies where it's basically just the same thing over and over, like similar, right? And then they phase out.
I said Noah Smith. I didn't mean who am I thinking of? The Apatow kid.
Oh, Judd Apatow. Oh, Seth Rogen.
No, 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 no. I mean, for lack of a better, the fat Jew.
Jonah Hill. They're both
Thank you.
fat.
Yeah. Well,
Or one
okay,
of them was.
that's technically true, but yeah, I was thinking no, Jonah Hill is who I was thinking of because then he was jumping into Moneyball and all that, and he's tried to get his drama chops in there more than
Yeah,
Rogan, but
yeah. He kind of fell into doing like supporting roles, right, in bigger movies. But I think they're kind of separate, right? Because the comedy stars like Kevin Hart did this, right? He gets a handful of movies and then people kind of forget it, he just kind of fades into it. But like the actual movie star, the guy that like you saw the poster, he was in it, you were excited. that doesn't really exist anymore. Like even the bigger stars now, like I mean, Chris Pratt might be the closest one, but even then, he's just jumping from franchise to franchise. He's not, it's like Jurassic Park and then Marvel movies. It's not like he's doing standalone films that everyone's excited about.
That's a good call on Pratt. Yeah, and that makes sense jumping series to series because I'm trying to think. But when was the last even? I mean, those were the blockbusters. I'm trying to think of a standalone blockbuster.
Oh, that's hard because even with Tom Cruise, it's been like the Top Gun 2, and then there was the Mission Impossible
Right.
movies, right? Which are not. I don't even know. I mean, yeah, it's been so long. Everything is a sequel or like a remake of some sort.
Yeah. Well, and
Right.
it's just a retread of a reactionary talking point, right? Like there is no creativity right now. We're just recycling what's already been and trying to get back to the old heights because we don't have the vitality to create something new.
Well, and to be a little bit fair to Hollywood, I've read a little bit about this. I do think a lot of it has to do. It's a financial issue, right? Where there are people that can write good screenplays, but the studio's not taking the risk because the ROI is not there anymore. Because theater attendance, you don't get as much money from theaters. You don't get the DVD sales, right? You don't get that on the back end because a lot of films would make up for whatever they didn't make up in the box office, they would make up on DVD sales, right, or VHS. All of that's gone, right? So now, if you're a studio and you got money to burn, like you're probably not as willing to take a risk on a one-off film when you have guaranteed money in Jurassic Park 75.
Yeah, so the argument then is that to some degree streaming has forced us either into a repeat of IP or risking it on a completely fractured system and hoping that you get enough niche viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really what it is. I know that I've seen writers and actors talk about this, or directors have said like it's harder to get films made that don't already come with a fan base because of that reason. Like also don't get the TV contracts. Back in the day, you could, that's why you would see Speed on TBS over and over again, right? Because there was that contract, and now you just have streaming, so it doesn't work that way. So the money's not there, and they're not willing to take that risk. And then these streaming platforms are obviously staffed by like hyper woke DEI people. So the only films they'll make, what Netflix will make is, blackface version of whatever historical event that you enjoy.
Yeah, that's. I was talking with somebody several weeks ago during the Christmas season, and that's why I found Klaus such an interesting movie. On top, I liked it, but then two, the fact that they were able to sneak that in there and have a not a Christian movie, not remotely, but a positive Christmas winter vibe going on with no retconning, no political anything. Just kind of shove it in there. That was awesome.
I'll have to check. I didn't see that one. I need to see that. It's so
I,
hard now. Like I almost have a rule that if the movie is like made after like 2015, I just don't watch it, generally speaking.
oh yeah, well that's like I'm. If I go back and watch a sitcom in the past few years, it's like I actually watched what is it, Home Improvement or King of the Hill or whatever.
Yeah, me and my wife have just recently rewatched Frasier all the way through, and that's gold.
What was it?
Yeah, well, so I never liked the show when I was a kid. So first of all, funny story. I got as a kid, I didn't have cable till I was probably like 13. But I always thought that Will and Grace and Frasier were the same show. And all I knew when I was like 13 or whatever, 12, was that there was a gay dude in Will and Grace, and I thought the brother in Frasier, which I mean he's gay in real life, but I thought that was the show and he was the gay character, so I wouldn't watch it. I was like, I don't see that.
Right.
And so then
Yeah.
I got older and I'm like, oh, this is actually hilarious.
So I have only made it. It was just one of those things that it kind of petered out, and I never picked it up again. It wasn't because I actively quit watching it, but I think I made it like halfway through the first season. So yeah, if you're giving it the stamp of approval, I'll have to go back and check that out.
Yeah, it's good, man. I mean, you up until towards probably like season 7, it starts to get repetitive, but that's just because if you ever notice, sitcoms are just story engines, right? Like you have your people, and then you just put a series of, you put a problem in there, and you let the characters basically play it out. And eventually, you run out of stories to run through that story engine.
Yeah, that was King of the Hill, man. Seasons probably 8 through, it might have been 8 through 12. It's like, all right, we've kind of been here for a minute. But they picked it up there at the end. They ended on a good note, which means I'm a little bit worried about them bringing it back this year. We'll see.
Well, they'll probably screw it up. They did that with Frasier. I haven't watched the new one, but um, they already canceled it, and I was like, I don't really, we don't need to revisit it, man. And again, it goes back to that thing, like they just got to revamp stuff because they won't do anything new.
Yeah, that's fair. And the Judge to me is an interesting character. He noticed things, especially earlier on in his career. He would
Hmm.
notice things, but he never got to the point where he came to the conclusion that should have naturally been drawn from them. And so whether it was Office Space, whether it was Beavis and Butthead, whether it was he came close sometimes in King of the Hill, but then he had to chop that up in some ways. And I think on some of it he kind of caught lightning in a bottle, but now it's I don't know. We'll see what happens here in the future.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was actually watching. Me and my boys watched all the Men in Black movies over the last week and a half, and he's in the first one. He's driving the immigration van in the first movie.
Wow, I don't even think I've seen. It's probably been over a decade since I've seen the first one, and I haven't seen any of the other ones.
They hold up, man. They're still funny. I mean, especially because they're that weird period of time in the '90s where, like, how AA would always talk about going back to Fresh Prince. Like you watch Men in Black, and it's this very interesting back and forth where Tommy Lee Jones is like the straight laced, like serious white dude, and Will Smith is the loud, unserious black guy, and it's played that way, and everybody just laughs at it, like, oh yeah, black dudes are like this, white dudes are like this. It's kind of weird to watch it and see like that there was this attempt to like normalize this relationship that clearly just goes out the window once Obama gets elected.
That's actually a really interesting point because another one I'm thinking is you had okay. Specifically, what I'm thinking of is Family Matters, which was just a weird dynamic because you've got the super nerd, but then even the family, the main family, is a relatively straight laced police officer family. Well,
Hmm.
Cosby Show, you could throw Cosby Show in there too. It's this straight laced like no, they're like us. And then there was this almost awakening in the late '90s, and then you started getting what am I thinking? Like Martin and I know they were there, but I didn't watch them. I guess Queen Latifah was around that time,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And it is like you said, it's almost trying to, like no, these are two distinct cultures, and it's cool. We could just kind of vibe together.
Yeah, like I mean, there was this even shows like Martin, which were like explicitly black, were done in an I guess I don't know how to phrase this right, but like a non-offensive way. Like they were never like jabs directly at like white people. Like they would have jokes, right, made at white people's expense, but it wasn't like it wasn't mean spirited or like white people are awful. It was just like white people can't dance, ha ha ha.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess I mean that was Carlton. That was his
mhm.
character was the whitest guy you'll ever know.
Yeah, it's wild, man. It's to go back and watch those is strange because it's such a vibe shift, so to speak, from like that environment to the like overtly sort of anti-white propaganda you get with the stuff now. Like even we watched the new Batman movie, right? Me and my son, my oldest son, were watching it,
Which
and then
okay, so what are we now? Is this the Twilight guy?
yeah,
Okay.
I think it's called The Batman. I don't know, but anyways, it's actually fairly decent. The first and second act, the third act, it turns kind of woke because it turns into like this um oh, internet 4chan anons are gonna kill people, So it gets kind of stupid at the end, but the girl that plays Catwoman is Lenny Kravitz's daughter, right? And the movie works fine, and then at one point she has to throw this like line about all these rich white dudes are the problem, and then she proceeds to make out with Batman, which is ironic. Many such cases, I guess, but
Well, I
they
was
had,
gonna say, is it ironic or is it true to real life?
it's true to real. Yeah, no, it is. It is probably true to real life. Actually, like they couldn't help themselves. Sometimes a writer can't help but just tell the truth on accident, I guess.
Hey, so Misanthrope has been watching us, and he said that he highly recommends the Tintin cartoons from Nelvana. Now, I'm aware of them. I watched them a little bit as a kid. Do you have much experience with them?
Actually, my oldest son started watching them like a year ago. They're free on Amazon, and he really enjoys them. They're pretty based. And the first like 15 episodes, he was like, "They're smoking cigarettes. They got like real guns," and I was like, that's it's a kids cartoon, but it's not like highly sort of like softened for this generation. So I would recommend them.
Very cool. I know so this is going to make me sound way older than I am, but what it is that we got cable for like 2 years when I was growing up, and it was right as Cartoon Network was coming out, and so it was all the repeats of the old Hanna-Barbera stuff, and so
Hmm.
we would see like Johnny Quest and Speed Racer, and and even up through the '80s. I mean, with GI Joe and whatever, the stuff you could get away with was wild. I don't think they were
Oh
smoking on GI Joe, but still.
no, but like they like I watched with my kids the original Transformers movie, and my oldest son commented, he's like, "Dude, this is brutal." And I'm watching it with them. I'm like, "Oh, like when they're killing the other Transformers, they're just like blowing their heads off. Like it's not obviously there's no blood or anything because they're robots, but it's very violent for like a kid show. And then of course they like kill Optimus Prime in like the first 30 minutes. So they were like, he was freaked out by that.
Man, back when you could do that stuff. I remember the one that always caught me off guard a little bit as a kid was the Secret of Nim.
Oh, dude, that one, first of all, that's probably my favorite animated movie. But when I was a kid, the scene with the owl would almost give me nightmares. Like it would freak me out.
Oh yeah, he was just the because didn't he have a monocle? No, no, hold on. I'm confusing
No,
the owl from that movie and the owl from Rover
Winnie the
Dangerfield.
Pooh? No.
No, did you ever see that Rover Dangerfield? It's rough, but it's funny. Well, maybe it's funny to go back and watch and be like, can't believe I watched this, but
I never saw that one. I remember Secret of NIM, and I remember my mind being blown when I realized that NIM stood for National Institute of Mental Health.
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because then I remember I was in school and I started getting those and because they were doing the whole AR reader or whatever, and it's like, oh, I can read these and get points and earn stuff. So it's
Well,
fun.
that goes back to that. Like, did you ever see Watership Down?
Okay, that that was brutal.
but
Dogs
but
dogs aren't
oh,
dangerous.
it's but what was interesting about that and Secret of NIM was like you had these kids cartoons that were like adult level storytelling. Like these were real, like these were deep stories. They even Secret of NIM, it's like these rats been experimented on by and they got you, but then I don't know what happened. At some point, they stopped making actual stories for kids.
Well, and that's the thing too is just crafting a story. Tolkien explicitly made The Hobbit and pointed it towards a younger crowd. I don't know that Waters did that with Watership Down. Let me walk it
So
back. He made it for his
is
children,
yeah,
but
he used to tell. Well, he would tell the story when he was like driving. I
yeah.
think he was driving, and all I can think is that he's consciously or subconsciously like was taking things that he was hearing in the news and things like that and apply, what I'm saying, and kind of weaving them into this story. And so it ends
Oh
up
yeah.
being more adult than like you would think it would be. But I think the thing also too was back then people looked at stories as like a serious. It's like, this is a serious art form. We're just doing it for children. You know what I'm saying? So they would take, adult subjects or things that kids still need to know about, and they would just kind of tweak them for children instead of looking at like, how do we make something that entertains children? That seems to be like the only purpose behind kids media now is just to entertain them and make them laugh.
We can blame it all on Ren and Stimpy.
Yeah. I wasn't allowed to watch Ren and Stimpy. I grew up in a really
I wasn't either. That's why I blamed it on.
I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons.
Nor was I. I think,
which in hindsight was probably a good thing.
Yeah. So this is interesting because I assumed, we make up characters in our head. I assumed you were raised in a Catholic household. That was a little bit what's a good word for Catholics? World-wise. Maybe that's
no, see, you missed the deep lore. I was raised Southern Baptist. I converted when I was in my late 20s.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So how did mom and dad take that?
They're not really. If they were, if it was a different denomination that had a deeper like theological, like if they really catechized and like they probably would have taken it harder. But like Baptists, and I don't mean this any offense, they're not the most like theologically literate, so like they don't even know, like some of them do, but most of them just kind of look at Catholics like, oh yeah, that's weird, so it wasn't like the end of the world. Whereas like my grandmother was raised Church of Christ, so she was like,
oh, hello,
yeah, she had a hard time with it.
Hardcore Campbellite.
Oh, dude, my grandmother, I'll give her this. She could quote scripture better than anybody I've ever met in my life. But yeah, she was not happy about the Catholic thing.
Golly, she probably wasn't happy about the parents going Southern Baptist. My goodness.
Well, no, she softened because my grandfather, I think, was like high church Methodist or whatever when they got married. So she kind of stepped away from Church of Christ, but she still carried that like that really intense, like I don't know what you call it, but you know how they are, right?
Dude, it's brutal.
Yeah.
It is.
So
yeah, I know so I grew up general evangelical, and I got different things went on that made me aware of the whole Young Restless Reformed. And so by the time I fell in with Baptists there for a minute, these were 1689 covenantal, being Baptist means something.
Right.
Yeah. And so,
well, see, I grew up in the more like it was almost like tangent. It was like very, very traditional Southern Baptist, like small church, like it was a couple, maybe 200 years old. It was like the church was so old, the bricks had fingerprints in them from when they were made, right? But so it was like very traditional hymns and all that stuff. But the youth group was like that hard, like that really into that like mega church, sort of that mega church, non-denominational type stuff. So I just kind of, by the time I was like 16, I was like, this is done. I walked away from it. So from the time I was 16 until I was like late 20s, I just basically was an atheist, for lack of a better term. Like I just didn't, I didn't really engage with it at all, because every question I ever had about the faith would be, in that environment, there was never an answer for it. So,
okay. Now, was there not an answer because you shouldn't be asking that question? Or was there not an answer because there just weren't really deep thinkers? I mean, to be kind of rude,
Well, no, it is. It's so like the example, I actually remember the moment that I first was like, I don't think these people are serious, which in hindsight, looking back, I think not all people need everything answered, right? Some people are content. And so I was in Sunday school, and my grandmother had this massive collection of National Geographic, right? And I had been reading them, and I come to Sunday school, and I asked my Sunday school teacher, what happens to people who die and never hear about Jesus, like these contacted
Yes.
tribes in the Amazon. And she looked at me and said, I don't know. And I was like, how do you not know that? That seems like a really big problem, right? And so that was the first moment where I was like, this. So I'm thinking more about this than you are, and you're an adult. And then from that moment, it was just like I would have deeper theological questions, and there'd be no answer to it, and stuff like that. And so I kind of fell away. And then when I was in college and I started reading philosophy and stuff, anyways, I started looking at Catholicism. I was like, oh, wait a second. Like, there's an answer for everything. You might not agree with the answer, but there's an answer, you know?
Yes, and that's actually what I was going to say is, and had you asked a different Sunday school teacher, they would have given you likely a different answer, because there is this there's this room in there, not just for a different interpretation, but a wildly, almost
Hmm.
fundamentally different interpretation, and
Yeah,
it gets
because because I kind of accepted later on, obviously, like the idea that like, well, um, as long as they live their life best of their ability and their knowledge, then you know, they're probably good to go. Oh, did we lose you? I can't do a show by myself. I'm not that entertaining. Oh,
let's see, there we go.
you are. You're back. I was gonna say I can't carry it by myself. I'm not.
I lost it for a second,
Yeah, but
but
well, what I was gonna basically saying is that I how can I word this? I kind of I accepted the understanding that as long as they lived their life to the best possible, the best way they could with the knowledge they had available, and they were kind of in the clear, which made logical sense to me, right? So that answer satisfied it, but then even if I had had Sunday school teachers that could answer those questions, the other problem I always had, and this is not a jab or to start a theological debate, because I understand there's answers for all this from every side. I never could square the fact that like my parents' church, like the that denomination was founded in like 1800 and something, or maybe 1700, and I was always like, well, what about all the Christian history for like I don't know 2,000 years before that? Like, what do you do with that? You just pretend it doesn't exist?
yeah. So okay, this is interesting. That is, mm, so I wind up because of different things in young restless reform circles. I started attending a Baptist school, a a big Baptist university, with intentions of doing ministry stuff inside of that. And then we're digging into the books, and they're like, "Oh, you can't do. It's got to be credo baptism, and then none of this pedo stuff." And it's like, okay, but we're hanging out with all these Presbyterians and all that. And I'm continuing to read the confessions, and as soon as that domino fell
Hmm.
on how children are supposed to operate inside of the house, it was game over. It pushed me all the way into, pick your flavor of high church. I really don't fight in between Catholic, Anglican, and daggum Orthodox. There's things that I believe are more correct, but I pretty much keep those to myself.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a fight worth having, but it's interesting because one of the things that I've noticed is, there I think the issue you have with some of the lower church stuff, like I think you have two issues. Like there's the logical or the sort of historical explanation, which is like, you have the modernist crisis, and you have the shift away from the seminaries and things like that, right? But I also think that part of the issue is that it's very difficult to interface with Christian history and also explain why your church is correct, even though it's only been around for 150 years. Even if you have the answers, that's a lot of questions to juggle for most people. And I think that's why they don't engage with it, generally speaking.
Or and this is what got me dealing with Church of Christ and all that. It's there's no creed but Christ, and so then
Yeah.
you go back, and the Baptists do this to a smaller degree with the. Did you grow up on the Trail of Blood and all that?
Mm-mm, I don't think so.
So there's this idea that the Baptists have through a great trail of blood, through the martyrs to the
Mm,
pagans to the
I know what
martyrs
you're
to the
talking about.
Catholic
Yeah.
Church, and yeah, that they have held tight to the one true faith, and that it's not nearly as strong inside of most Baptist churches. There was definitely when I was messing with Church of Christ stuff, there was definitely a strain of that was still pretty strong.
Well, yeah, I remember hearing. We never really they never spoke about that, but I do remember hearing about that. Like, oh no, we've actually always secretly been there, and we were persecuted. I think though that the internet, um, it's good. It's got its good qualities and bad qualities, but one of the good qualities for Catholics is that it really, especially like probably like 10 years ago, it gave Catholic apologetics like it revitalized Catholic apologetics, and all of a sudden I saw where before the stereotype was Catholics don't know anything about their faith, et cetera, et cetera. I would watch the Trent Horn debates and things like that, and it was very difficult to walk away from those and be like, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. So I think that
I
was a positive.
Yeah, I enjoy Trent, and he because he does a pretty good job of really getting down to the meat of something. Like this past week, did you see his last one on on marriage?
No, I haven't
And
seen the newest
okay,
one.
yeah, so it was interesting. He was digging in on marriage and why marriage can't be solely for procreation, and sex in particular can't be particularly for procreation. It has to be more than that.
See, I always thought that was like, well, I maybe not common knowledge, but I had always understood it from a philosophical standpoint as like sex was there was it was dual natured, right? So there was the procreative and the unitive property, and they couldn't be separated. One without the other was just as bad, right?
Yes. Yep. And that for some reason that via media that places stands in the middle and takes both sides equally and combines them into an appropriate response is incredibly hard for Christians, non-Christians, anybody to just get.
Yeah, man, I think it's interesting, and I could go off on a tangent about this. And I don't remember who I got this idea from. This is not my own, but I remember reading somebody, and they made the point that the Protestant exception, once the Protestants accepted contraceptives, they couldn't articulate the purpose of marriage anymore, right? Because now it wasn't the procreative function wasn't necessary. It was just about the unitive, quote unquote. And so then the entire like that's basically their argument was like that from that moment, that's how you get to like gay marriage being legal. Right. Because now you can no longer and I will say hearing that and reading that, like, it does make it very difficult to make a strong argument for marriage that isn't purely religious if you don't have that sort of backing.
Yeah. And I think there's a strong argument there in that the Protestant it's a theorem that I need to walk away from this stream, put it together, and then throw it out there. What exactly it is I'm trying to say about Protestants, but there's almost this sense in that they believe too. It almost creeps where I'm headed is that it almost creeps into this weird form of Gnosticism that they would absolutely deny, and they would say no, we're here with the material, and it's a both and. God is spiritual and he's acting in the material, but there's at the same time I don't think that's how it always plays out, and in particular with Baptists that then go on and deconstruct and say, oh, the faith is this, that, and the other. It's almost like they believed too much. and
Yeah, no,
and a god of their own making. And so when God doesn't operate in that manner, it's almost like they become depressed and reject.
well, I think that's the I mean, it kind of just goes back to that age-old joke about like they rejected the Pope and made themselves the Pope. Like they made a million popes, right? Everybody becomes sort of the arbiter of the like how they translate, right? They decide, and it's all filtered through their own, and as human beings we can't help that, right? We're going to filter things with our own particular, proclivities or machinations all behind it, because there are plenty of things, rules within the faith, within Catholicism, that personally, like, I know if they weren't there I would be like, you know, but I'm forced to adhere to them to an extent, right? I have to acknowledge that they're real. But if it was up to me making my own choices, I'd probably shave a little off, make it easier on myself. And I think it's really comes down to something that's simple in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah, well, that makes sense. There, and I got to do this in a way that recognizes magisterium, in that the jump, it, it digs into the whole sola scriptura thing, but the jump to say that not only was Mary an ever virgin, and not only was she assumed, but we also have to logically jump into the Immaculate Conception. Like these are places that you wouldn't necessarily get to straight from Scripture, but you recognize in the magisterium and in the history, like you've already talked about a couple times, that because the church has held to these beliefs, I continue on in these beliefs, whether they're mine organically or not.
Well, and another thing, and you're absolutely right, but I think another key factor in that too is like people, when they're able to do that themselves, they pick up like the Bible and they read it and they go, okay, I can understand this. And I don't think, and this is just no fault of anybody's because not everybody thinks about this. I don't think people understand the amount of knowledge necessary to properly understand what you're reading, because one, you have to take into account you're not reading it in its original, language, right? And even if you could speak Greek, or if you could speak Greek, right, the Greek that you speak today is not the same as the Greek spoke 2,000 years ago. So you have to have this historical knowledge of the language and the particular turns of phrase and the way things are done, the social issues of the time, the historical atmosphere. You have to know all these things, you know? And so I don't think people realize, like, you can't just, like, when you read a sentence in there, it's not as straightforward as you think it is, because you don't have the available knowledge to do that.
Oh, 40 days means 40 days means 40 days.
Oh, well, I mean,
Right?
I
And
guess,
it's
yeah, that's true.
those, it's the idioms. And it's, I remember, and this was not me, I can't remember if it was Scott McKnight or NT Wright or somebody, but it was this idea, and actually it might have been somebody critiquing them. Anyways, it was this idea that the the atheist, the atheist materialist, and the low church, the low churchman, they both suffer from the same problem, in that it's that they both read the Bible completely literally, and
Hmm.
there is no nuance, and there is no symbolism, there's no typology, there's nothing.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the dangers in that is, I think that's one of the reasons we've seen so many young people leave the faith, and why like numbers of Christianity have decreased so much. I think a huge factor in that is that, and Catholics are guilty of this too, not properly catechizing. I mean, we've got our own problems, but when you operate that way, especially in a world that has so much information readily available, and you send these kids off to school and they come home and they have questions, and you can't answer them because your mentality is, well, all the answers are in the Bible. Well, yeah, they're in there, but you have to know how to get them out. And you just repeating the same mantra over and over again is not, that's not working when your kid's been at college or even high school and can, thinks they're smarter than you now because they can use $5 words.
Oh man, a psych 101 kid. He could conquer the world.
Hey man, I was a psych minor in college. Biggest waste of money. Huge waste of money.
Well, I mean, it could have gone in and been 120 in debt to be a 40 grand a year social worker. So,
well, I mean, I got a history degree, so it's not that much better. I mean, I'll leave you with this. This is my thought on psychology because I gotta jump. But my personal, the way I view psychology after learning so much of it in college, I think that 98% of it is just post hoc rationalizations for shitty behavior.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think that's all it is.
Hey, so put a bow on this. Tie this back into the NFL, the NCAA, and what you were telling us in your writings, and then chill for a second.
Yeah, man. I guess to kind of circle it back to that, I think sports are great, and I think they're awesome, and we should, there's something that's important in the culture. They definitely help people. They create bonds and they strengthen bonds, and they also they create intercommunal bonds, right, through rivalries and things like that. But those the sports cannot be disconnected from the community, right? You can't just rip them up and have this corporate logo then, because it just becomes not that it isn't already a surrogate activity to some extent, but it becomes a purely surrogate activity. And I don't think we should glorify that. And I think those of us on the right don't have to play the stupid game of sports ball bad, right? We can recognize the value and utility in sports, but also recognize that they've become warped and manipulated, sort of warped and co-modified, just like everything else in our culture. So, I mean, that's my thing with sports. And I think college football up until recently still had that. And that's why so many people are so passionate about it. And if you want an example of what it should probably look like, probably 90s, 80s college football is where you could go to find something like that. So that's my last word on that. As far as shilling goes, you can buy my book if you're into that sort of thing. It's a Southern noir detective mystery. It's linked on my Twitter, which is J Slaughter Esquire, or X, I guess. And then you can also find my other writings, or my sort of cultural essays at Texas John Slaughter at Substack.com.
Hey, what was the title of that book?
Oh yeah, it's Crimson Veil. You can find it on Amazon, or like I said, the link is in my bio on Twitter.
All right. Well, Mr. Slaughter, we greatly appreciate it. And you have a good one.
Ah, man, thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. All right, everybody else, appreciate you hanging out. Mr. AM, appreciate seeing you. And not too much chilling for me. You can find me at Wander Mr. Panda. Go and check out the Corey Mahler debate with Adam Green this past week. Not because it was a particularly good debate, but because it's going to get you into the idea of what was the primary religion at the creation of man. What does it mean to have a religion and have truth that goes beyond regional ideas? All right, take it easy.